When Dirty Harry hit theaters, it shocked audiences. The film's stark violence, nihilistic villain, and unapologetic anti-hero left a lasting impression. At the time, the early 70s were marked by rising crime rates and the aftershocks of the counterculture movement. This social climate only amplified the film's impact. Dirty Harry was no typical shoot-'em-up. It raised tough questions about law enforcement ethics, personal justice, and the price society is willing to pay for safety. Even today, people still argue over its moral ambiguities. But one thing is certain: it has become a landmark in American film history. Ready to hear the behind-the-scenes stories? Let's lock and load with 30 facts you might not know about Dirty Harry. 1. Frank Sinatra was almost cast as Harry Callahan. Did you know that Clint Eastwood wasn't the first choice to play Harry Callahan? In fact, the legendary Frank Sinatra was initially attached to star. That story alone could fill an entire behind-the-scenes drama. According to lore, Old Blue Eyes had committed to the role, but before production could really take flight, a wrist injury forced him to step down. Rumor has it Sinatra hurt his hand and struggled to hold the powerful .44 Magnum for lengthy takes. After he exited, Warner Brothers scrambled to find a replacement. They approached stars like John Wayne, Steve McQueen, and Robert Mitchum. Yet none of them felt quite right for the role. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood, riding high on the success of his man-with-no-name westerns, ended up reading the script. The rest is history. Had Sinatra not bowed out, the entire vibe of Dirty Harry might have been drastically different. Less stoic menace and more old-school crooner swagger. Instead, Clint Eastwood took the part and, with it, defined a new era of cinematic policing. 2. The original title of the film was not Dirty Harry. Early versions of the script had a different title, something like Dead Right. The character was still named Harry Callahan, but the film wasn't yet called Dirty Harry. In those early drafts, the story didn't ask the tough moral questions we now associate with the movie. Some versions explored how far a cop might bend the law for justice, but they lacked the raw tension and grit that later defined the film. Everything changed when Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood joined the project. With each rewrite, Dirty Harry took clearer shape. The name Harry stayed the same, but the sharp, dangerous edge of the character only appeared after many script revisions. By the time filming began, the team knew they had something bold. It felt tougher, darker, and more intense than any standard cop drama of that era. 3. The villain Scorpio was based on the real-life Zodiac Killer. The villain Scorpio was heavily inspired by the real-life Zodiac Killer. This infamous murderer had terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s. That's why Dirty Harry hit so hard with audiences at the time. People still remembered the headlines, stories of a killer who sent cryptic letters to newspapers and police. The film took that fear and turned it into fiction. Scorpio mirrored the Zodiac's strange behavior. He contacted the media. He randomly targeted innocent people. That made Dirty Harry feel disturbingly real. For many, the movie blurred the line between fact and fiction. Some called it fear-mongering. Others saw it as a reflection of the anxiety gripping society. And, let's be honest, scenes of a nameless figure sniping from rooftops or kidnapping civilians felt all too possible. The movie tapped into that fear. Every showdown between Harry Callahan and Scorpio carried the weight of real-world terror. 4th, director Don Siegel liked to shoot quickly, not wasting time. Director Don Siegel had a notoriously lean shooting style. He hated doing more takes than necessary. His usual line to the cast and crew was, "If we got it, we got it. Let's move on." This approach suited Clint Eastwood perfectly. He had just finished several westerns with Sergio Leone. On those sets, he learned to work quickly and capture the essence of a scene without overdoing it. Siegel's fast-paced method also gave Dirty Harry a documentary-like quality. This was especially true in the city exteriors. They'd grab a shot and leave before the crowd even realized a movie was being filmed. Eastwood admired Siegel's confidence. He believed it cut through the unnecessary fuss and let the film's tension breathe. The result? A synergy between director and star that created something special. The whole film feels urgent, immediate, and dangerously alive. 5. Clint Eastwood deliberately kept the dialogue to a minimum. Clint Eastwood intentionally gave Harry Callahan minimal dialogue. His belief was simple. When you're holding a .44 Magnum and facing down killers, you don't need fancy speeches. Eastwood's mantra was clear. Harry should be a force of nature, someone who speaks more through actions and body language than with words. Even the quiet moments tell us everything. Harry sipping coffee, standing at a crime scene with that cold, deadpan stare. It all speaks volumes. Eastwood pushed for an understated style that still oozed threat. Every time Harry says something, it matters, because he rarely talks. In a decade when many police dramas featured long monologues about justice, Dirty Harry cut straight to the bone. A glower, a gun. That was enough. The simplicity made Harry iconic. He became an unstoppable, sometimes terrifying presence, someone who didn't waste breath on pleasantries. 6. Andrew Robinson, Scorpio, was so scary that he scared the real police. Andrew Robinson, the actor cast as Scorpio, didn't seem like a killer at first glance. He looked too friendly, almost too normal, for such a monstrous role. Director Don Siegel pushed him hard. He urged Robinson to dig deep and find the darkest corners of his psyche. The goal was clear: create a kind of madness that would make the audience's skin crawl. Robinson delivered. His performance was so unsettling that even real police extras on set felt shaken. Some reportedly asked for breaks after intense scenes with him. He found a switch inside himself and flipped it. Out came Scorpio's psychosis: wild eyes, sudden bursts of laughter, and an eerie, unfeeling presence. The result was terrifying, so much so that people who met Robinson in real life had trouble separating the actor from the character. To them, he was Scorpio. 7. Robinson had no experience with guns and often jumped when he fired. Andrew Robinson had no prior experience with firearms. Because of that, he often flinched involuntarily whenever he fired a gun on set. At first, Don Siegel was concerned. He worried that the visible jerks would undercut Scorpio's menace. But after watching the dailies, he had a change of heart. The flinches actually worked. They gave Scorpio a jittery, unpredictable edge. Audiences could feel the adrenaline pulsing through him, as if even he was surprised by his own bursts of violence. It added something raw, something impulsive, something dangerous. Robinson later said he was grateful for Siegel's open-mindedness. A stricter director might have forced endless retakes just to get rid of the flinching, but that would have killed the spontaneity, and the character might not have felt as disturbingly real. 8. The .44 Magnum was really heavy. The .44 Magnum, famously described in the film as the most powerful handgun in the world, was no lightweight. It was hefty, so much so that Clint Eastwood would joke between takes that it felt like weightlifting. Sometimes the production required multiple takes of scenes where Harry aimed the gun. You could practically see Eastwood's biceps burning by the end, but that heaviness added something real. When Harry pulls out the Magnum, it's not just a movie prop. You feel the weight, both physically and morally. It's a serious weapon with deadly capability, and that presence matters. The gun isn't just hardware, it's part of Harry's identity. By the time the film hit theaters, the .44 Magnum had become its calling card. Audiences couldn't imagine Harry with anything less. 9. Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood had a very close relationship. Clint Eastwood and Don Siegel had already built a strong bond through earlier projects like Coogan's Bluff. By the time they teamed up for Dirty Harry, Siegel saw Eastwood almost as a protege. They shared the same creative instincts, both drawn to lean, no-frills storytelling, tough, stripped down, and straight to the point. For Siegel, Dirty Harry was the perfect platform. It allowed Eastwood to evolve from a frontier gunslinger to a modern urban enforcer. In interviews, Eastwood often credited Siegel for shaping his directing style. Siegel believed in giving actors clear, simple instructions, then trusting them to fill in the rest. That lesson stuck. Years later, when Eastwood became a respected director, he still followed that ethos. Minimal interference, maximum trust. Let the performance breathe. Dirty Harry remains a product of that creative synergy. Director and star, locked in step. And the result? A film that still hits like a bullet. 10. The line, "Do you feel lucky?" was improvised on set. The classic, "Do you feel lucky?" speech was mostly improvised on set. Earlier drafts had versions of it, but Clint Eastwood made changes in the moment. He trimmed the lines, reshaped them, and aimed for something sharper, more direct. Instead of a long monologue, Harry's threat hits like a bullet. Cold, sudden, final. Crew members recalled the hush that fell over the set the first time Eastwood delivered it. His voice low, steady, menacing. It sent chills down people's spines. The camera kept rolling. That tension? It was real. A lightning-in-a-bottle moment, captured because the filmmakers trusted Eastwood's instincts. Today, you can't picture Dirty Harry without that line. It's more than a quote. It's the essence of the character. No nonsense. Unshakable. Ready to act. 11th. Cinematographer Bruce Surtees used dark lighting to create a sense of gloom. Cinematographer Bruce Surtees, nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, brought a brooding aesthetic to Dirty Harry. He used moody lighting and underexposed shots to cast a constant sense of unease. The night scenes in particular felt ominous. Neon signs flickered against a black sky. Street lamps glowed just enough to reveal a body, or hide something worse. Surtees turned San Francisco into a noirish maze. Shadows stretched across alleyways and sidewalks. Criminals could be hiding in them. So could the law. He believed darkness was essential, not just visually, but thematically. The line between right and wrong was murky, just like the edges of his frames. This style marked a clear shift from the polished, brightly lit cop shows of the 1960s. Dirty Harry looked different. It felt different, and that made it unforgettable. 12th. San Francisco officials were concerned about the film's portrayal of the police. San Francisco's political figures had mixed reactions to Dirty Harry. Mayor Joseph Alioto worried the vigilante cop storyline could hurt the city's progressive image. But behind the scenes, local tourism officials quietly welcomed the spotlight. The film showcased San Francisco in every frame, its iconic architecture, sweeping vistas, and maze-like streets. The city became more than a setting. It was a supporting character. Over time, Dirty Harry joined Bullitt and Vertigo as part of San Francisco's cinematic legacy. Tourists still visit the spots where Harry faced off with Scorpio. Some local businesses even leaned into the film's mystique. So, while the mayor may have feared the film's tough guy tone, many residents came to embrace the notoriety it brought. 13. The scene where Harry stomps on the jumper's hand upset Eastwood. There's a scene where Harry steps on a suicidal jumper's hand to subdue him. Clint Eastwood later admitted he felt uneasy filming that moment. Even for a character known as Dirty Harry, it felt brutally harsh. But the script was clear. It needed to show how far Harry would go to maintain order. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. That one action said it all. Harry is both a savior, stopping a man from jumping, and a brute, inflicting pain to end things fast. It's a moral mess, and that's the point. Scenes like this are why critics called the film fascist or dangerously pro-vigilante. The controversy didn't fade. It clung to the film for decades. But whether you see Harry as a hero or a menace, moments like this force you to ask, how far is too far? The film's budget was only $4 million, but it grossed over $35 million. The budget for Dirty Harry hovered around $4 million, a modest sum, even for 1971. Warner Brothers took a gamble. They weren't sure if audiences would embrace such a grim, no-frills crime story. But when the film opened, it crushed expectations. It made over $35 million domestically, a massive hit for its time. That box office success sent a clear message. Audiences were ready for something darker, something that tapped into the fears of a society dealing with rising crime and post-60s disillusionment. The age of clean-cut heroes was fading. People wanted grit. They wanted moral gray zones. And they wanted a lead who might be just as dangerous as the villains. Dirty Harry gave them exactly that. 15. Lalo Schifrin's score features jazz and funk. Lalo Schifrin's experimental score gave Dirty Harry a sound like no other. He blended jazz, funk, and avant-garde elements to match the city's raw tension. Drums rumbled like a heartbeat as Harry moved through the streets. Eerie electronics underscored Scorpio's madness. Every note amplified the unease. Schifrin knew the film needed something modern, something dissonant, a soundtrack that captured a society on edge. He had worked with Eastwood before on Coogan's Bluff, but Dirty Harry was a leap forward, grittier, riskier, more alive. You can almost feel the city breathing through the music, that urban pulse, that creeping dread. The score became inseparable from the film's identity. For many fans, it's impossible to picture Harry walking under neon lights without hearing Schifrin's haunting riffs echo in their minds. 16. Eastwood cut most of the comedy. Clint Eastwood took an active role in shaping the final cut. He pushed hard for fewer jokes and comedic beats. Early versions of the film had some light moments, brief, almost playful exchanges between Harry and his colleagues. The idea was to humanize him, make him more relatable. But Eastwood wasn't having it. He believed humor would undercut the film's tension. Worse, it might confuse the tone, making people think this was a buddy cop flick instead of a raw statement about violence and justice. He wanted the audience on edge. From the first frame to the last, director Don Siegel agreed. By the time they locked picture, most of the light-hearted moments were gone. What remained was tight, cold, coiled with tension, and it worked. Audiences didn't remember Dirty Harry for jokes. They remembered the grit, the edge, and the near-total absence of relief. No silly subplots, just the stare of a man who doesn't flinch. 17. Andrew Robinson received death threats after the film's release. After Dirty Harry hit theaters, Andrew Robinson faced real-life fallout. His performance as Scorpio was so convincing, it blurred the line between fiction and reality. Audiences couldn't separate the actor from the role. He started receiving anonymous letters, some with death threats, accusing him of being the monster he portrayed. One note demanded he pay for his crimes. Warner Brothers took the threats seriously. They even assigned Robinson a temporary security detail for protection. It was a sobering moment. Robinson later said he was shocked people genuinely believed he was as unhinged as Scorpio. In a strange twist, the power of his performance became a double-edged sword. It launched his career, but it also made his day-to-day life feel a little too much like the nightmare he had acted out on screen. 18. The film was shot in San Francisco without a set. Don Siegel was adamant about shooting on real city streets. He didn't want studio sets. He wanted San Francisco as it really was. That meant filming guerrilla style. No closed sets, no staged extras, just the real hustle of the city. They shot scenes in active neighborhoods, often without warning pedestrians. Cameras would roll as Eastwood and other actors performed on actual sidewalks. Then they'd move on fast before crowds could gather. If you look closely, you can spot passers-by glancing into the lens, visibly confused. They had no idea a major Hollywood film was unfolding around them. But that was the point. Siegel wanted the city to breathe on camera. Not a backdrop, but a character. Flawed, chaotic, alive. The raw energy of those street scenes still hits hard. It's gritty, unpolished, and totally real, a reflection of Siegel's deep commitment to authenticity. 19. The shootout at Kezar Stadium feels spooky. Kezar Stadium became the haunting backdrop for one of the film's most intense showdowns. Shrouded in San Francisco's signature fog, the stadium looked desolate, almost post-apocalyptic. Crew members later said the mist added a layer of creepiness they hadn't planned for. It felt like stepping into a haunted sports arena. Scorpio scuttled through the empty bleachers. Harry moved with purpose, stalking him step by step. Every footfall echoed through the stands, amplifying the tension. That scene captures what Dirty Harry does best, turning ordinary places into nightmares. Rooftops, bus stops, sports fields, familiar spaces warped into hunting grounds where danger lurks and innocence doesn't belong. It's not just atmosphere, it's psychological warfare, and the city itself becomes part of the chase. 20. The bus hijacking scene was inspired by real-life crimes. The infamous school bus scene might feel over the top, but it had unsettling roots in reality. It was partly inspired by actual incidents of hijacked or kidnapped buses in Northern California. Strangely, some of those real-life events happened after the movie was released, adding an eerie sense of foreshadowing. Dirty Harry tapped into a primal fear that even something as routine as a school bus ride could spiral into chaos. When Scorpio takes over the bus, singing children's songs in a cracked, maniacal tone, it becomes one of the film's most disturbing moments. The fear on the kids' faces is raw, unmistakable. At a time when most films shielded children from direct danger, Dirty Harry crossed that line. It didn't flinch. It reminded audiences that violence doesn't follow rules, and it can strike anywhere. 21. Harry Callahan's clothes were Eastwood's own. Clint Eastwood often brought his own clothes to set. That iconic brownish tweed jacket and red sweater vest, not the result of a costume department brainstorm. Eastwood pulled them straight from his personal closet. He believed wearing his own wardrobe helped him slip into Harry's mindset more naturally. It felt authentic, lived in. The look worked. Harry Callahan didn't dress like a movie cop. He wore straightforward, slightly rumpled clothes, exactly what you'd expect from a real San Francisco detective. That choice made Harry more relatable. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't stylized, he was grounded, practical. Just another man trying to hold the line in a city spiraling out of control. The muted tones of his outfits also matched the film's grim visual style. Nothing popped, nothing distracted. It all blended into the world, cold, neutral, and on edge. 22. The original script had more political elements. Producer-writer Dean Reesner remembered that early drafts of Dirty Harry leaned heavily into political commentary. They tackled the justice system's failures and the rising fear of unchecked crime. But as production moved forward, Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood shifted gears. They chose to narrow the focus, zeroing in on Harry's personal war with a remorseless killer. Some traces of the broader debate remained. The judge who defends Scorpio's rights, the red tape Harry keeps hitting, but overt political messaging was stripped back. Instead, the film let Harry's actions speak for themselves. That choice made Dirty Harry more unsettling. There's no sermon, no clear moral instruction, just a brutal scenario, a sadistic murderer, a furious detective, and a legal system that might be too fragile to handle either. The question lingers, should the system bend or break? The film never answers it for you. It just dares you to decide. 23. The film was criticized as fascist. Upon release, Dirty Harry sparked immediate controversy. Critics like Pauline Kael slammed it, calling it fascist propaganda that glorified police brutality. Others praised Harry Callahan as a bold, no-nonsense hero who cut through red tape. The split was sharp, and that only fueled the film's momentum. If half the media brands a movie an attack on civil liberties, while the other half calls it a gritty masterpiece, you can bet audiences will show up in droves. People had to see what the fuss was about. The controversy turned Dirty Harry into a cultural flashpoint. Viewers left the theater arguing, was this a call for reform, or just a fear-stoking fantasy? Did the film offer a solution, or just spotlight the chaos? Wherever you landed, one thing was clear. Dirty Harry had struck a national nerve, and once it hit, it never let go. 24. The controversy helped make the film more successful. At first, studio executives were nervous. The negative press was loud. They feared it might scare audiences away. But the opposite happened. People flooded into theaters, drawn by the controversy, the headlines, and the promise of a raw, unfiltered adrenaline rush. They wanted to see Clint Eastwood's no-compromise anti-hero for themselves, and what they found was unforgettable. Dirty Harry became a pop culture lightning rod. To some, he was a symbol of strength in a society unraveling. To others, he was a dangerous reflection of a trigger-happy mindset. But either way, tickets sold, and Eastwood's star exploded. Warner Brothers realized what they had created. Not a clean-cut sheriff from the frontier, but a new kind of icon. A city cop who didn't play by the rules, but got the job done. Brutal, flawed, relentless, dirty. Harry wasn't just a hit. He was a revolution. 25. Eastwood did not think of Harry Callahan as a good guy. Clint Eastwood's personal politics were hard to pin down. He leaned conservative on some issues, yes, but he also valued personal freedom and distrusted blanket authoritarianism. To him, Harry Callahan wasn't a role model. He was a flawed anti-hero, a man pushed to brutal extremes only when the system failed to protect the innocent. Eastwood never claimed Harry was what policing should be. He saw him as a product of his time, of fear, frustration, and institutional breakdown. He knew the film would stir ideological debate. In fact, he welcomed it. The early 1970s were turbulent. Rising crime, shifting norms, a society reeling from change. Dirty Harry didn't offer neat solutions. It held up a mirror to the chaos. Callahan wasn't a moral compass. He was the man who pulled the trigger when no one else would. 26. Andrew Robinson created many of Scorpio's crazy traits himself. Andrew Robinson brought something wild to Scorpio, something unplanned. He added twisted giggles, clownish facial expressions, little bursts of madness that came out of nowhere. Those choices weren't in the script, but they worked. They made Scorpio feel like a mind on the verge of collapse. In some scenes, Robinson's improvised mania startled even Clint Eastwood. At least once, Eastwood asked for a pause, just to regroup before they rolled again. That kind of creative freedom let Scorpio evolve. He wasn't just a typical movie villain. He was a trickster, a chaos agent, someone who might kill you or laugh in your face first. There was no pattern, no logic, just dread. That unpredictability glued audiences to their seats. No one knew what he'd do next. And that tension, constant, electric, is a big reason Dirty Harry still feels so raw, so immediate. 27. The film was completed ahead of schedule, production wrapped ahead of schedule. Part of that was Don Siegel's no-nonsense style. He didn't waste time. He knew the shots he wanted and had no patience for over-rehearsing. The other part? Clint Eastwood. He rarely needed more than one take. Quick, precise, locked in. That momentum gave Dirty Harry a head start. While other crime thrillers were still in post-production, Harry Callahan was already in theaters. And the timing was perfect. The public conversation about crime and policing was hitting a boiling point. Dirty Harry didn't just join that conversation, it dominated it. By striking first, it set the tone, set the bar. And every gritty cop movie that followed would be chasing its shadow. 28. The film's success paved the way for 4 sequels. The film's massive success made sequels inevitable. 4 followed: Magnum Force, The Enforcer, Sudden Impact, and The Dead Pool. Each explored new angles of Harry Callahan, moral gray zones, shifting villains, new layers of rage and restraint. As the years passed, the cultural climate changed. The Vietnam-era cynicism of the early 70s gave way to Reagan-era tough-on-crime policies, and the Dirty Harry series evolved with it. Sometimes the sequels doubled down on vigilante justice. Other times they questioned the cost of unrelenting force. But Eastwood was the constant. His presence anchored the character. Harry never softened, never wavered, just adapted. Not every sequel matched the raw brilliance of the original, but taken together, they cemented Harry Callahan's legacy, one of the most talked-about, polarizing, and enduring figures in the history of crime cinema. Irabatti Wanbada. The line, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" is often misquoted. Misquoting the iconic .44 Magnum line became a running gag among fans. People often mashed it together into, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" a version that's close, but not quite right. Even Eastwood has joked that he mixes it up now and then. Art imitating life. Or maybe life imitating art. The actual line? You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do ya, punk? But honestly, the exact wording hardly matters anymore. What matters is the feeling, the threat, the challenge. It's not just a taunt, it's a philosophy, a worldview. Harry's not bluffing. He's inviting you to gamble, knowing full well the odds are stacked. And if you're on the wrong side of his gun barrel, chances are your luck's already run out. 30. Dirty Harry remains controversial to this day. When filming wrapped, cast and crew took a breath and realized they'd made something different, something that pushed the genre, something that struck a nerve. Dirty Harry wasn't just about crime and punishment. It wrestled with deeper questions. What are we willing to sacrifice for safety? How far is too far? And who decides? Looking back, Eastwood admitted his stoic performance carried more than just grit. Beneath the surface, he was channeling the unrest of the early 70s, the frustration, the helplessness, the fear that the system wasn't holding. Andrew Robinson said Scorpio left a mark on him, too. Crawling into that character's skin took something out of him, and the darkness lingered. You can feel that weight in every frame. That's why Dirty Harry still lands like a gut punch. It's not just about pulling a trigger. It's about the quiet violence beneath the surface of everyday life, the thin line between order and chaos. And it forces us to look at the man holding the gun and ask, is he a savior? Or something just as dangerous as the evil he hunts? Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. Fade to black. In the end, Dirty Harry remains a landmark of American cinema precisely because it refuses to offer easy answers. It presents a cop who breaks the rules, a man who acts outside the bounds of polite society. And then it turns the question on us. At what cost do we maintain order? Is a dirty approach ever justified in the face of true evil? Or does it erode the very civil liberties we claim to defend? Critics still debate that. Maybe they always will. But that's where the film draws its power, from the discomfort, from the tension, from the way every viewing feels like the first, no matter how many times you've seen it. That was the intention all along. Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood didn't want to give us closure. They wanted us gripping our seats, wrestling with a question that has no clean answer. Do you feel lucky? It's more than a catchphrase. It's a challenge, a provocation, a loaded question in a world where right and wrong blur under pressure. Decades later, we're still circling that moral labyrinth, still asking ourselves where the line is and who gets to cross it. Because if Dirty Harry taught us anything, it's that sometimes the most important conversations don't start with answers. They start with a gun, a stare, and a question we're still not sure how to answer.